Karim Pierce, United Kingdom Permanent Rep to the United Nations. Welcome to our screen. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I'd like to start my questions by the statement made by the Secretary General, by the appeal he made to Russia, Iran, and Syria not to attack an all-out offensive, military offensive against Idlib. What do you think the chances are of them heeding the call and stopping this planned offensive against the people of Idlib?
Well, we support what the Secretary General said, and nearly everybody in the Security Council yesterday called for the attack on Idlib, the imminent attack, to be halted. But there are no signs at the moment that the Syrians have heeded that call, and there are no signs that the Russians and Iranians are putting pressure on the Syrians to stop an all-out attack. We believe they ought to be working with Turkey on the Turkish plan to work with the Syrian opposition to get the terrorists out of Idlib and spare the population.
What do you think would be the humanitarian effect of such an attack on Idlib?
I think it would be disastrous. Disastrous politically. It would put an end to the peace process. Staffan de Mistura, the UN envoy, has already said that. And from a humanitarian perspective, there are 3 million people in Idlib. There are more babies than terrorists in Idlib. It would be an absolute disaster, and it would set back reconstruction in Syria for decades.
Actually, Mark Lowcock, the Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs here at the United Nations, said it would be the worst humanitarian disaster in the 21st century as well. I mean, everybody's stressing that. Do you think the Russians and the Iranian and the Syrian government could surprise us? Like we wake up one morning and we find them in a massive military strike on Idlib?
I think we must be prepared for the worst to happen. But even as we argue for it not to happen, and even as we urge the Russians and Iranians to restrain the Syrians, I think it's very important that they work with Turkey. Russia, Turkey and Iran are the Astana guarantors. Turkey has got a plan. Russia and Iran could work with Turkey to implement that plan and spare the civilians of Idlib, and that's what we urge them to do.
De Mistura also mentioned a plan in the Security Council of sparing the civilians' life from possible mass exodus. He also spoke about the separation between terrorists and people, civilians, and also spoke about the media campaign, possibility of a media campaign by the people of Idlib, that they want the armed groups out. And he said Russia and Turkey must ensure during the plan that all air attacks should stop. He also had a plan. But what do you think the effect of such an attack on the whole peace process that Staffan de Mistura is trying to put together in Geneva?
If there's a large all-out attack on Idlib, it will set the political peace process back immeasurably. It will probably put an end to it for the foreseeable future. I think Staffan de Mistura has already said this, which is one reason why the Secretary General is so worried. But really everyone is worried about the fate of 3 million civilians in Idlib. And Russia and Iran hold those people's lives in their hands. They should work to put pressure on the Syrian regime.
Do you expect the Security Council to keep meeting very frequently in the coming days to stop such an onslaught on the civilian people in Idlib?
I don't know if we will be able to stop it, but I think we will all want to try, and we will want to meet frequently, at least to shine a spotlight and to be able to urge the Russians and Iran to live up to their responsibilities and stop the attack.
American, British and French officials always speaks nowadays about a possible strong reaction to any use of chemical weapons in Syria. Bolton spoke about it in a different way, and he said that the US is working with the United Kingdom and France on a coordinated military strike in Syria if the regime uses chemical weapon. I wanted to make it clear to our viewers, are you only talking about chemical weapons or any attack, even with conventional weapons, against the civilians, 3 million civilians living in Idlib?
I think it's important to stress that if there is an attack on civilians in Idlib, not only the Syrian army units and their commanders and the Syrian regime but also Russian army units and Russian military units and their commanders and Iranian units and their commanders will be held accountable by the international community for an attack on civilians in Idlib. And I think that's very important. The Secretary-General has said that indiscriminate firing on civilians in Idlib may be a war crime, and they ought to think about that very carefully. In respect of our statements, we have made them about chemical weapons, and we have done so because there is a universal prohibition on the use of chemical weapons, which the Syrian regime has broken in the past and Russia has condoned. So there's something particularly awful about reversing that prohibition. We want to strengthen the prohibition. That's why we've said we will take our responsibilities if chemical weapons are used.
But I'm sure, ambassadors, you agree, killing is killing by conventional weapons or by chemical weapons. De Mistura said in his speech to the Security Council last Friday that most of the killing in Syria took place by conventional weapons. So do we understand now, if the attack happens and civilians are killed, but not by chemical weapons, by conventional weapons, these three countries, the P3, United States, United Kingdom and France, will not take action?
I'm not going to be drawn on what action we may or may not take, but I will repeat that if there is an attack on civilians in Idlib, by whatever means, the Syrian units will be held responsible, and so will Russia and Iran.
I would like to move to the trilateral Tehran summit last Friday between the three guarantors of the Astana process. U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley said it very clearly that the Tehran summit of the three guarantors has failed. No one else called it that or went that far. Do you agree with that characterization?
Well, the Astana guarantors were set up to bring de-escalation zones to Syria, and manifestly that has been shown not to work. It worked for a while, and we were happy to support it while it did work, but it's not working at the moment. And Turkey put forward a plan in Tehran for the evacuation of terrorists from Idlib. We need Russia and Iran to rally to that plan that the Turks put forward and work with them to make it a reality, and that's not happening. But there are smaller scale things that the Astana guarantors can do to support Stefan de Mistura, and I understand that they have been in Geneva talking about the Constitutional Commission, which is an important part of the political process, but it pales into insignificance besides what they can do to halt any attack on Idlib.
In yesterday's Security Council, requested by Russia, the Russians tried to explain or justify the impeding military operation in Idlib. One claim of them is that the operation actually is against counterterrorism, is against the terrorists. And the other claim is that this escalation zone was only temporary, and therefore there is no longer a need to uphold the escalation in Idlib. What do you say to these claims?
Well, I think the last point is a direct falsehood. When the de-escalation zones were first set up, a lot of civilians left the towns they were in and went to Idlib precisely because they saw the de-escalation zone holding there. So actually the Idlib situation has been made worse by the influx of so many civilians from elsewhere. But I think the argument about counter-terror operations is a smokescreen. This is about putting the Syrian government back into every major centre in Syria. It's not an anti-terror operation. There are only some 15,000 terrorists in Idlib, and the Turks have a plan for dealing with those. They does not need an all-out assault on civilians to deal with the terrorists.
Actually, the Turks are arguing that it might increase terrorism if the attack takes place.
I think that's almost certainly likely to be the case. That's a pattern we've seen elsewhere, and I think the Russians would do well to remember that ISIS is the outcome of the fighting in Syria, not the cause.
Cause of it, yes. You also said during one of the Security Council sessions on Syria that there are more babies in Idlib than terrorists. Would you expect the same expect the names of Russia and Iran to be mentioned in the list of the children in armed conflict next year if the attack goes on? They're already killing children by this indiscriminate bombing of the civilian areas. But if they go into Idlib and kill children, and I'm sure there will be children falling by the side, would their names should be included in the list of countries or armies who kill children?
Yes, I believe they should. The UN has made it clear what the civilian composition of Idlib is. We have made it clear in the Council. Many other Council members have made it clear that children are at risk in Idlib. So yes, I would consider Russia and Iran, if an attack goes ahead and kills children, I would consider them liable for that.
What do you know about yesterday's meeting between Staffan de Mistura and the three representatives from three guarantors of Astana that took place in Geneva?
So far, I haven't had a readout of that, I'm afraid. We're watching to see what happens. I understand it was about the Constitutional Committee, but I haven't had a readout yet.
What are you expecting from the meeting that is planned for Friday between de Mistura and the small core of countries, which are Egypt, France, Germany, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Kingdom and the US? What are you looking to get out of that meeting?
It will be to see if there is anything we can do at this stage that will help accelerate progress on the politics and a political settlement. I don't know if there will be, but it will be important to have that conversation. We also look to Staffan de Mistura to find a way of bringing the guarantors from Astana together with the group you've just mentioned, so that we can have an integrated plan and we can have a plan in the round. But no plan will work if there's an assault on Idlib, so the starting point is still Idlib.
And you really have no guarantees that this will not take place. Actually, all the indications, military indications by reports from the area, that they are getting ready for an attack.
I don't have any guarantees, but obviously we continue to hope it won't happen, and we continue to do everything we can in the Security Council and bilaterally to urge it not to happen. And I think a lot of other countries are doing likewise.
There was a report today by the Independent Commission of Inquiry belonging to the Human Rights Council in Geneva that came out today actually saying that people's displacement in Syria was the worst this year compared with all the previous years. And of course, any attack on Idlib will be a disastrous situation in refugees heading towards Turkey that already closes borders to any incoming refugees.
Well, Syria has had over 6 years of this war, and every year we seem to cross some superlative, and every year seems to be the worst we've had for one measure or another. The Syrian people desperately need an end to the war. It begins with Idlib, but it needs to continue through a proper political process.
Yes. I'd like to move to Yemen. Special Envoy Martin Griffiths briefed the Security Council yesterday and confirmed his disappointment for the Houthis failing to attend their Geneva talks, in spite of the huge efforts by him and by many parties, including the government of Yemen. And the whole Security Council actually speeches, they all expressed disappointment of the Houthis not turning up to the consultation. Now he is heading to Muscat and Sana'a and maybe Riyadh. Can you tell us something about the plan ahead? Who's he going to meet, and what can we expect from this shuttle diplomacy?
Well, I don't want to go into too much detail because we want the Special Envoy, we want Martin Griffiths to succeed. And sometimes if you shine too bright a light on what he's actually doing behind the scenes, it complicates that end rather than enables it. But Martin will be meeting with all the parties, including, as I understand it, representatives of the Houthis, and he will be trying to set up a round of peace talks of the sort that should have happened in Geneva, trying to get to the bottom of why the Houthis didn't come and trying to make sure there's a way forward that sees all the parties go to Geneva, engage with Martin, engage constructively and in good faith. Some
diplomats here argue that the Arabs, the Gulf nations and others are not tough enough with the Russians on Syria. And they also argue that the United Nations and the Special Envoy and the Security Council are not tough enough with the Houthis on their behavior, not turning up to meetings. If somebody wants peace, they take a plane, they go and sit down. It doesn't matter how or when. They feel that there is not enough pressures put on the Houthis to explain to them there are consequences for them not taking part in these consultations with good intentions and good faith. Do you agree with these views?
Again, I think it's the sort of thing that if at this stage we say too much in public, we make the special envoy's life harder, not easier. We look to all parties to go to Geneva or wherever Martin designates, to engage with him in good faith, to actually take part in the talks and to be constructive.
But Ambassador, the Houthis, and this is no secret now in the Middle East, they look at the Security Council as a paper tiger. They don't think there are consequences for their actions. They haven't been forthcoming. We had the Kuwait, we had the Geneva. There have been a lot of efforts to get them to the table. They are the one who took the Sana'a by force. They are coup plotters who succeeded in doing what they have to do. Until when we keep appeasing them and cajoling them to come to the table, when they really have resolution like 2216, stating very clearly what they have to do to get the peace that the Yemeni people deserve.
We want to see 2216 upheld, but we also believe that you cannot bomb your way to the negotiating table and there isn't a military solution. So we will work with the UN to do whatever can be done to bring all the parties to the table and to get them to engage constructively. And yes, of course, eyes will be on the Houthis at the moment, but we need to get back to the negotiating table.
Confidence building measures. This is the start that everybody's talking about, especially the legitimate government of Yemen. They always talk about ending ballistic missiles, lobbying against the civilians in Saudi Arabia, encouraging economic progress in Yemen, releasing detainees and prisoners, granting more humanitarian access, and reopening possibly the airport of Sana'a, ensuring that there are no, of course, arms smuggled from anywhere in the Middle East, from Iran or others. What are the chances that we can see the start of the implementation of such confidence-building measures? Because that is really the point that we can move forward from there into sitting together on one table.
Well, the Security Council discussed this with the Special Envoy in its session yesterday, and the Special Envoy outlined the discussions he was nevertheless able to have in Geneva with the other parties about confidence-building measures, and he believed that the parties who came to Geneva had been constructive in respect of confidence and security building measures. So I think that's a helpful start, but of course it's not enough. But some useful things can be done. I think you're absolutely right to point to the missile attacks on Riyadh and the United Arab Emirates. We want those to cease. We've been very critical of them. We want to see freedom of navigation for shipping in the Gulf. These are all very important issues, and we want regional neighbours, including Iran, to stop shipping missiles and other weapons to the Houthis.
Hodeidah. How do you see the solution for this city and these people in Hodeidah who were taken by force? It was occupied in 2014 by force. We mustn't forget that. By the Houthis. It was in the hand of the government. Now, how do you see the liberation of the people of Hodeidah to go forward without stopping the aid that comes through the port of Hodeidah and without having huge numbers of civilians casualties?
Well, it's very important, as you say, to keep the port open because of the commercial and humanitarian supplies for the Yemeni people that come through that port. The UN has a plan, and they work with the United Arab Emirates in particular to keep the port open and keep humanitarian supplies going. There was a deal on the port, and that's what enables the port to be open. There has not yet been a deal on the city. That was to have been discussed in the context of Geneva.
Well, there was a plan by Martin Griffiths, which the coalition accepted, but the party who did not accept that plan was the Houthis.
Well, we're back to the same point, that there needs to be the Geneva talks, and they need to sit down and discuss all these issues.
Yes. In Washington, and the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, testified in hearing in the Congress on the 12th of September that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, are doing their utmost to avoid civilian casualties in Yemen. We are taking, and he said they are taking tangible measures to limit the damage to the civilian infrastructures in Yemen. The same view was repeated by the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis. Is that a view that your government subscribed to? And how do you feel the other members of the Security Council view of that sort of effort by the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to limit civilian casualties?
It's very important that all parties in the Yemen conflict uphold international humanitarian law, and that includes the principles of precaution, discrimination and proportionality, and that's absolutely critical. We ourselves have a lot of conversations with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia about international humanitarian law. We help them with training. It's obviously important that their military and their targeters are properly trained, and we have been able to assist them with that. I know that the JIAT, which is the assessment centre that works in Saudi Arabia on the progress of the conflict, takes this very seriously. I'm not in a position to give an overall assessment, but I know that it's taken very seriously. And, for example, there was a decision on the recent bus attack that had been a mistake and that compensation would be paid. And we welcome the fact that there has been that frank outcome.
Karen Pierce, the United Kingdom Permanent Rep to the United Nations, we thank you as always for being available to speak to our viewers, and we thank you and wish you the very best. Thank you.
It's a big pleasure.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.